The towering gates of Blackstone Academy gleamed in the morning sunlight, their wrought iron curves forming intricate patterns that whispered exclusivity. Students milled about the campus, their designer backpacks slung over shoulders clad in tailored blazers. Among them was Clara Hayes, clutching her thrift store satchel tightly as she wove through the crowd. Clara's presence was unremarkable to most, a small, quiet girl with chestnut hair that framed her face in soft waves. Her uniform, though the same navy blue as everyone else's, bore the telltale signs of wear. The hem of her blazer was fraying, and her shoes, though polished, had scuff marks that betrayed their age. She walked with purpose, her eyes focused ahead, hoping to avoid attention. In contrast, Veronica Kingsley swept through the crowd like a storm. Her fiery red hair cascaded down her back, catching the sunlight as she strode with an air of unshakable confidence. Flanked by her two closest friends, Bianca and Grace, she was the embodiment of wealth and influence. Wherever Veronica went, whispers followed. Clara reached her locker, relieved to have avoided any encounters. She opened it carefully, revealing neatly stacked textbooks and a row of meticulously labeled folders. She pulled out her chemistry notes, double-checking her schedule. The upcoming scholarship exam weighed heavily on her mind, a beacon of hope in an otherwise challenging life. "Look who's here," a familiar, disdainful voice rang out. Clara froze. She turned to see Veronica leaning against the lockers, a smirk tugging at her perfectly glossed lips. Bianca and Grace stood behind her, their laughter echoing in the hallway. "Good morning, Clara," Veronica said, her tone sweet but dripping with malice. "Studying already? You know, all the studying in the world won't fix, well, everything else." Clara bit her lip, clutching her notes tighter. "I have class," she mumbled, trying to sidestep the trio. "Not so fast," Bianca chimed in, blocking her path. "What's the rush? Don't you want to chat?" Grace grabbed Clara's satchel, yanking it away. "Let's see what treasures you've got in here," she sneered, emptying the bag onto the floor. Books and a battered notebook spilled out, along with a homemade sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "Ew," Veronica said, wrinkling her nose. "What is that smell? Did you pack lunch from the dumpster?" Clara bent down, gathering her belongings as quickly as she could. Tears threatened to spill, but she willed them back. "Please, just give me my bag." Bianca held the satchel just out of reach, laughing as Clara stretched for it. Before things could escalate further, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Veronica Kingsley, what is going on here?" Mrs. Sanderson, the head of the science department, approached with a steely gaze. Her no-nonsense demeanor had earned her the respect and fear of students alike. "Nothing, Mrs. Sanderson," Veronica replied smoothly, her expression instantly transforming into one of innocence. "We were just helping Clara with her things." Mrs. Sanderson crossed her arms. "Helping? It looks to me like you're causing trouble again. Clara, are you all right?" Clara nodded, though her voice betrayed her. "I'm fine." "Clara, head to your class," Mrs. Sanderson said firmly. "Veronica, my office." Now, Veronica's smirk faltered, but she masked it quickly. "Of course, Mrs. Sanderson," she said, turning on her heel. Bianca and Grace exchanged uneasy glances before slinking away. Clara gathered her belongings, her hands trembling, as she walked to class. She could hear the whispers around her, feel the stares burning into her back, but she held her head high, determined not to let them see her break. The cafeteria buzzed with activity as lunchtime rolled around. Clara sat alone at a corner table, her head bent over a notebook. She was reviewing formulas for the scholarship exam, her pencil moving methodically across the page. Across the room, Veronica sat at her usual spot, her friends chattering about weekend plans. But her eyes kept drifting to Clara. Something about the girl's quiet resilience irked her. How could someone with so little act so unbothered by everything? "She thinks she's better than us," Veronica muttered, her voice barely audible over the din. "What are you talking about?" Bianca asked, pausing mid-bite of her salad. "Clara," Veronica said, her tone sharpening. "She walks around like she owns the place. Like she's too good to talk to anyone." Grace rolled her eyes. "She's just a nobody. Forget her." But Veronica couldn't. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Come on." The trio approached Clara's table, their presence casting a shadow over her notes. Clara looked up, her stomach sinking. "What's that?" Veronica asked, gesturing to Clara's notebook. Studying for the scholarship? You think you have a chance? Clara's cheeks flushed. I'm just trying to do my best. Your best won't be good enough. Veronica sneered, snatching the notebook. She flipped through the pages, her expression mocking. These notes are a joke. No wonder you're always alone. Give it back, Clara said, her voice shaking. Oh, I'll give it back, Veronica said, tossing the notebook into a nearby trash can. There, now you can study where you belong. Clara stared at the trash can, tears stinging her eyes. The room seemed to close in around her, the laughter of Veronica's friends ringing in her ears. But as Veronica turned to leave, Mrs. Sanderson appeared once again, her face a mask of fury. Veronica Kingsley, that's enough. The entire cafeteria fell silent. All eyes turned to Veronica, who looked genuinely startled for the first time. Office. Now, Mrs. Sanderson commanded. Veronica sat stiffly in the principal's office, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Principal Harris, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, looked at her from behind his large mahogany desk. Beside him stood Mrs. Sanderson, her expression resolute. I've heard enough complaints about your behavior this semester. Veronica, Principal Harris began, his voice calm but firm. But today's incident crosses a line. Veronica rolled her eyes, feigning indifference. It was just a notebook. I didn't hit anyone. Mrs. Sanderson's voice cut through the room like a blade. Destroying someone's work, humiliating them in front of their peers, this isn't just mischief. Veronica, it's cruelty. Principal Harris nodded. Your actions are not only unacceptable, but they also violate the school's anti-bullying policy. Effective immediately. You're suspended for 1 week. Veronica's head shot up, her composure faltering. Suspended? You can't do that. I can, and I have, Principal Harris said firmly. Your father has been informed and will be arriving shortly to discuss this further. At that moment, the door to the office opened, and Marcus Kingsley entered. His tailored suit and polished demeanor radiated authority, but his expression was dark. He looked at Veronica, then at Principal Harris. What's going on here? Principal Harris stood, extending a hand. Mr. Kingsley, thank you for coming. I was just explaining your daughter's suspension. Marcus turned to Veronica, his jaw tightening. Suspension? For what? Mrs. Sanderson stepped forward. For bullying another student. I've witnessed her behavior myself. And today she destroyed Clara Hayes' belongings in the cafeteria. Veronica opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. Is this true? He asked, his tone sharp. Veronica hesitated, then mumbled, it's not a big deal. Not a big deal? Marcus repeated, his voice rising. Veronica, this is disgraceful. Principal Harris stepped in. We take these matters very seriously. Mr. Kingsley, Veronica will need to use this time to reflect on her actions. We also recommend she attend mandatory counseling sessions. Marcus nodded curtly. She'll do whatever is required. Veronica looked at her father, stunned. Dad, enough. Veronica, Marcus snapped. We'll discuss this at home. Clara sat in the school library later that day, her notebook replaced with loose sheets of paper she'd borrowed from Mrs. Sanderson. She tried to focus on rewriting her chemistry notes, but her hands shook slightly as she remembered the scene in the cafeteria. Clara, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Mrs. Sanderson standing beside her, holding a cup of tea. I thought you could use this, Mrs. Sanderson said, setting the cup down. She pulled out a chair and sat across from Clara. How are you holding up? Clara managed a small smile, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. I'm okay. Thank you for standing up for me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. Mrs. Sanderson leaned forward, her gaze kind but firm. Clara, you didn't deserve what happened. No one does. You're a bright, hard-working student, and people like Veronica act out because they're dealing with their own issues. Not because there's anything wrong with you. Clara nodded, but the weight of the day still sat heavily on her shoulders. It's hard, though. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Everyone else seems so different. Mrs. Sanderson reached out, placing a hand gently over Clara's. You belong here as much as anyone else. Don't ever doubt that. And you're not alone. If you ever need someone to talk to, my door is always open. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat but swallowed it down. Nodding again. Thank you, Mrs. Sanderson. As the teacher left, Clara returned to her notes. determination flickering back to life. She couldn't let Veronica's actions derail her goals. The scholarship was too important. It was her chance to prove that hard work and resilience mattered more than privilege or cruelty. The ride home was tense. Veronica sat in the backseat of her father's sleek black sedan. Her arms crossed and her jaw set. Marcus hadn't spoken since they left the school, but the air between them was charged. When they arrived at the Kingsley estate, Marcus gestured for Veronica to follow him into his office. The large, book-lined room felt more imposing than usual as he closed the door behind her. "Sit," he commanded. His voice clipped. Veronica obeyed, dropping into the plush leather chair across from his desk. She avoided his gaze, staring instead at the polished wood surface. "Explain," Marcus said, his tone measured but cold. "I don't know what you want me to say." Veronica muttered. "It's not like I hurt anyone." Marcus's fist slammed onto the desk, making Veronica jump. "Enough with the excuses. I raised you better than this. Or at least, I thought I had." Veronica's face flushed. "You don't understand. Everyone at that school judges me. They expect me to be perfect all the time. I just wanted to put Clara in her place." "Put her in her place?" Marcus repeated, his voice incredulous. "Clara Hayes has more integrity in her little finger than you've shown in this entire situation. Do you have any idea how this reflects on our family? On me?" Veronica's lip trembled, but she held her ground. "You only care about your reputation." "No," Marcus said sharply. "I care about the kind of person you're becoming. This stops now. Starting tomorrow, you're attending therapy, and you'll spend the rest of your suspension volunteering at the community center. Maybe then you'll learn something about humility." Veronica's shoulders slumped, but she didn't argue. For the first time, she saw genuine disappointment in her father's eyes, and it stung more than she wanted to admit. Over the next few days, Clara buried herself in her studies. She spent long hours in the library, poring over textbooks and practice exams. Her determination grew with each passing day, fueled by a desire to rise above the cruelty she'd faced. During the lunch break, Mrs. Sanderson approached her with a flyer. "Clara, I thought you might be interested in this." Clara took the paper, reading the bold print, "Future Innovators Scholarship Competition." Her eyes widened. This is perfect." "I thought so," Mrs. Sanderson said with a smile. "The deadline is tight, but I know you can do it. You've got the talent and the drive." Clara nodded, excitement bubbling up inside her. This competition wasn't just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. Winning could open doors she'd never dreamed of, and it gave her a sense of purpose that pushed the hurt from Veronica's bullying into the background. That evening, Clara stayed up late, sketching out ideas for her application essay. She wrote about her passion for engineering, her dreams of creating sustainable technology, and the challenges she'd faced. Her words poured onto the page, raw and honest, a reflection of her journey. By the time she finished, she felt a sense of pride she hadn't experienced in a long time. No matter what happened, she knew she'd given it her all. The next morning, Veronica stood awkwardly outside the community center. Her designer clothes felt out of place amidst the modest surroundings, and she shifted uncomfortably as a middle-aged woman with a warm smile approached. "Veronica Kingsley?" the woman asked, extending a hand. "I'm Mrs. Morales, the volunteer coordinator. Thank you for joining us." Veronica forced a polite smile, shaking the woman's hand. "It's, nice to meet you." Mrs. Morales nodded, her sharp eyes taking in Veronica's hesitance. "You'll be working in the literacy program today, helping kids with their reading. Come on, I'll show you around." As they walked through the building, Veronica noticed the worn furniture, the chipped paint on the walls, and the cheerful chaos of children running between rooms. The place was a stark contrast to the pristine halls of Blackstone Academy, and it made her feel uncomfortably out of her depth. In a small classroom, a group of kids sat at tables, their faces lighting up when Mrs. Morales entered. "Everyone, this is Miss Kingsley. She'll be helping us today." A boy with messy hair and a gap-toothed grin raised his hand. "Are you rich?" Veronica blinked, startled. What?" The boy grinned wider. "You look rich. My mom says rich people don't come here." "Tommy," Mrs. Morales chided gently, though she was smiling. "Let's focus on reading, okay? For the next 2 hours." Veronica sat with the kids, helping them sound out words and listening as they stumbled through sentences. At first, she felt awkward and out of place. But as the children warmed up to her, she found herself smiling despite herself. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and their genuine gratitude surprised her. By the end of the session, Veronica felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of purpose. When Mrs. Morales thanked her for her help, she nodded, her voice quiet but sincere. It was nice. I'd like to come back. Meanwhile, Clara's days were consumed by preparations for the scholarship competition. She spent hours in the school lab, working on a project she hoped would set her apart, a prototype for an affordable, solar-powered water filtration system. Her evenings were spent drafting her essay, revising it until every word felt just right. Mrs. Sanderson, true to her promise, provided guidance and encouragement, reviewing Clara's work and offering feedback. One late evening, as Clara adjusted the prototype settings, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "That looks impressive." Clara turned to see Veronica standing hesitantly in the doorway. She stiffened, her mind flashing back to the cafeteria incident. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice wary. Veronica shifted uncomfortably. I just wanted to apologize for everything." Clara frowned, unsure how to respond. "Why now?" Veronica looked down at her hands, uncharacteristically unsure of herself. "Because I was wrong. And because I've realized that being cruel doesn't make me better than anyone, it just makes me a worse version of myself." Clara studied her for a long moment. "Do you mean that?" "Yes," Veronica said earnestly. "I've been volunteering at the community center, and it's shown me how lucky I am. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I'm really sorry." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." For the first time, the tension between them seemed to ease. Veronica glanced at the prototype on the table. "What are you working on?" Clara's face lit up with excitement as she explained the project. To her surprise, Veronica listened attentively, even asking thoughtful questions. The next day, Veronica approached Clara in the cafeteria, this time without her usual entourage. "Clara, can I talk to you?" Clara looked up from her lunch, cautious but curious. "What is it?" "I was thinking about your project," Veronica began, sitting down across from her. "It's amazing, but you might need help presenting it. I've done a lot of public speaking, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." Clara blinked, surprised. "You want to help me?" Veronica nodded. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I really want to make things right. And I think this project is incredible. It deserves the best chance to succeed." After a moment's thought, Clara nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you're not serious about this." "I am," Veronica interrupted. "I promise." Over the next few weeks, Clara and Veronica worked together on the project. Veronica's confidence and polish complemented Clara's technical expertise, and the two found an unexpected rhythm as they rehearsed their presentation. Veronica, for her part, was humbled by Clara's dedication and ingenuity. She realized that Clara's strength came not from wealth or status, but from sheer determination and resilience. It was a quality Veronica found herself admiring deeply. Clara, meanwhile, was surprised by Veronica's genuine effort and newfound humility. While she hadn't forgotten the pain Veronica had caused, she began to see a different side of her, a side that was capable of growth and kindness. The day of the competition arrived. Clara and Veronica stood side by side in the auditorium, facing a panel of judges. Clara presented the technical details of the prototype with confidence, her passion shining through. Veronica followed, delivering a polished and persuasive argument for the project's real-world impact. When the results were announced, Clara's project was declared the winner. Overwhelmed with emotion, she turned to Veronica, who gave her a genuine smile. "You did it. We did it," Clara corrected, surprising them both. The scholarship not only opened doors for Clara but also deepened the bond between her and Veronica. Their partnership turned into an unlikely friendship, one that became a symbol of change and hope for the entire school. As for Veronica, she continued volunteering at the community center, finding fulfillment in helping others. Her father, moved by her transformation, supported her efforts wholeheartedly. Clara's triumph wasn't just about winning the competition, it was a victory of resilience, forgiveness, and the belief that even the deepest divides could be bridged by compassion and understanding. Clara's victory at the competition sent ripples through the halls of Blackstone Academy. No longer was she just the quiet girl. Students began to recognize her as someone to admire, not mock. Clara's journey, however, wasn't about fame, it was about proving to herself and others that resilience could overcome adversity. For Veronica, seeing Clara celebrated brought a mixture of pride and reflection. She realized how much she had underestimated Clara, not just as a student but as a person. The experience had reshaped her perspective, pushing her to consider how her actions had affected others. During the lunch break, Veronica approached her father. "Dad, can we talk?" Marcus Kingsley, always busy with business calls and meetings, put down his phone. "Of course, what's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about the scholarship Clara won," Veronica began. "There are so many students like her, smart, hardworking, but without the resources they need to succeed. I want to help them." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Help them how?" "I want to start a scholarship program at the school," Veronica said, her voice steady. "Something that provides financial aid, mentorship, and resources for students who need it most. Clara's shown me how much potential we're missing by ignoring people who don't have the same privileges we do." Marcus studied his daughter, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "That's a noble idea, Veronica. If you're serious, I'll support you, but you'll have to take the lead on this." Veronica nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "I will." With the scholarship funds in hand, Clara was able to enroll in advanced engineering courses and attend workshops she had only dreamed of before. Her mentors connected her with professionals in the field, and she soon found herself working on more ambitious projects. One evening, while sitting with Mrs. Sanderson in the school lab, Clara hesitated before speaking. "Do you think I can really make a difference?" Mrs. Sanderson looked at her, a gentle smile on her face. "Clara, you've already made a difference. What you've created here, a way to provide clean water to people who need it, is more than most people ever achieve. And this is just the beginning." Clara nodded, feeling a swell of hope. She wasn't just pursuing her dreams, she was beginning to see how those dreams could impact the world. The launch of the Kingsley Scholarship Initiative was a grand event, held in Blackstone Academy's auditorium. Marcus Kingsley had spared no expense. But it was Veronica who took center stage. Standing at the podium, she spoke with a conviction that surprised even herself. For too long, students with incredible potential have been overlooked because of circumstances beyond their control. This scholarship is our way of changing that. It's a step toward making sure every student has the tools they need to succeed. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "And I owe this idea to someone who showed me what true strength looks like. Clara Hayes, thank you for inspiring me and for reminding us all that resilience and kindness are what truly matter." The audience erupted into applause as Clara, seated in the front row, blushed deeply. Veronica stepped down from the podium and approached her, extending a hand. "Come on," she said with a smile. "This is your moment too." Clara hesitated but then took Veronica's hand, joining her on stage. Together, they unveiled a plaque commemorating the scholarship program, dedicating it to resilience, unity, and the power of change. Over the following months, Clara and Veronica became an unexpected team. Veronica used her family's connections to promote the scholarship program, while Clara contributed by mentoring applicants and sharing her story at events. The two grew closer, their friendship blossoming in ways neither had anticipated. Clara's honesty and grounded nature balanced Veronica's boldness and energy, creating a partnership that others couldn't help but admire. One day, as they worked together on a scholarship application review, Clara looked at Veronica thoughtfully. "Do you ever regret how things started between us?" "All the time," Veronica admitted, "but I'm grateful for where we ended up. I wouldn't be the person I am now without you." Clara smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Me neither." The Kingsley Scholarship Initiative quickly gained traction, with dozens of students applying for its first round. Clara and Veronica worked tirelessly to select recipients, focusing on those who demonstrated not just academic excellence but also determination and a desire to give back. At the end of the school year, Blackstone Academy held a special assembly to honor the first group of scholarship recipients. As the students took the stage to accept their awards, Clara felt a surge of pride. These were students like her, quiet, hardworking, and full of untapped potential. Veronica stood beside her, a satisfied smile on her face. "We did it," she whispered. Clara nodded, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "We really did." As graduation approached, Clara received news that left her stunned. She had been accepted into one of the country's top engineering programs. With a full ride, it was a dream come true. One she couldn't have achieved without the support she had received along the way. At the same time, Veronica announced her decision to study social entrepreneurship. Inspired by the work they had done together. "I want to keep making a difference," she told Clara, "and I want to do it the right way." The two promised to stay in touch, knowing their paths would take them in different directions but also knowing that their bond would remain. Marcus Kingsley's polished shoes clicked against the uneven pavement as he approached the community center Veronica had been volunteering at. The building was modest, its white paint peeling in places. But laughter and chatter spilled from the open windows, infusing the air with warmth. Inside, Mrs. Morales greeted him with her usual smile. "Mr. Kingsley, this is a surprise. What brings you here?" Marcus adjusted his tie, suddenly feeling overdressed. "I wanted to see where my daughter's been spending her time," he said, "and perhaps understand why it's had such an impact on her." Mrs. Morales led him through the bustling center, pointing out the programs they ran: literacy workshops, after-school tutoring, and art classes for children. Marcus listened politely, but it wasn't until they reached the tech room that something clicked. In the corner sat a group of teenagers, eagerly tinkering with old computers and circuit boards. One boy, no older than 13, held up a functioning robot arm he had cobbled together from scrap parts. "That's incredible," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Mrs. Morales smiled. "These kids are brilliant, they just need the tools and opportunities to shine. Unfortunately, funding is always a challenge." Marcus stared at the makeshift workshop, his mind racing. He thought of the luxury office he'd built for his company, the cutting-edge equipment he took for granted, and the untapped potential in this room. The disparity hit him like a wave. "I'd like to help," he said, the words coming out before he could think. "I want to fund a new lab. State-of-the-art equipment. More space, whatever you need." Mrs. Morales blinked, taken aback. "That would change everything for these kids." Marcus nodded, his resolve firm. "It's time I did something meaningful." Clara sat at the small kitchen table. Her younger brother, Alex, across from her. His workbook was open, but his pencil hovered over the page, untouched. "Alex," Clara said gently, "what's wrong?" He looked up, his brown eyes full of frustration. "I'm not smart like you. I can't do this." Clara's heart ached at his words. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "That's not true. You just need practice, and I'm here to help you." As they worked through the math problems together, the door creaked open. Their mother, weary from her second job, stepped inside. Her uniform was wrinkled, and her face was lined with exhaustion. But she smiled when she saw them. "How's it going?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. Clara stood, pulling her mother into a hug. "We're getting there." Her mother kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Clara. You're holding us together." Later that night, Clara stayed up late, working on her scholarship essay. The dim light of the kitchen lamp illuminated her determined expression. Her family's struggles fueled her drive. They were her reason for fighting so hard. Bianca hesitated outside the school library, clutching the folded piece of paper in her hands. She had rehearsed her words a dozen times, but the idea of facing Clara still filled her with dread. Finally, she took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Clara was seated at a table, her head bent over a notebook. She looked up as Bianca approached, her expression wary. "Clara," Bianca began, her voice trembling, "can I talk to you?" Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you want?" I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Bianca said, her cheeks flushing. "For everything. For laughing at Veronica's jokes. For not standing up for you. I was wrong." Clara studied her for a long moment. "Why now?" Bianca's shoulders sagged. "Because I've been thinking about what kind of person I want to be. And I realized I don't want to be the kind of person who tears others down. I want to make things right. If you'll let me." Clara's expression softened. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." As Bianca left the library, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It was only a first step, but it was one she was determined to take. Clara and Veronica sat in the empty auditorium, reviewing their presentation for the scholarship launch event. Papers were spread across the stage, and Clara's laptop hummed softly. "You've come a long way. You know," Clara said, glancing at Veronica. Veronica smiled. "So have you." Clara hesitated, then asked, Why did you decide to help me with the scholarship program? I mean, really? Veronica looked thoughtful. At first, it was guilt, but then, I started to see things differently. Working with you, seeing how much you care, it made me want to care too. You've inspired me, Clara. Clara blushed. You've surprised me. I didn't think you could change this much. Veronica laughed softly. Neither did I, but I'm glad I did. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, their differences forgotten in the glow of shared purpose. The auditorium was alive with energy as the Kingsley Scholarship Initiative celebrated its one-year anniversary. Students, teachers, and families filled the seats, chatting excitedly as they waited for the event to begin. On stage, a banner proudly displayed the program's motto, resilience, unity, and the power of change. Clara stood backstage, adjusting the microphone pinned to her blazer. She glanced out at the crowd, her heart pounding. This wasn't just another speech, it was the culmination of everything she and Veronica had worked for. Veronica appeared beside her, wearing a sleek but understated dress. Nervous? She asked with a teasing smile. Clara exhaled, nodding. A little, but mostly excited. You'll do great, Veronica said. You always do. The lights dimmed, and the room quieted. Veronica stepped onto the stage first, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She took her place at the podium, her confidence radiating. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice clear and steady. 1 year ago, we launched this program with the hope of creating opportunities for students who needed them most. Tonight, we celebrate the lives it has already touched, and the bright futures still to come. The audience applauded warmly as Veronica continued. She spoke about the first round of scholarship recipients and shared stories of their achievements. From Aisha's environmental research to Liam's acceptance into a prestigious music academy. Then, she gestured toward the Waynes. But none of this would have been possible without someone who showed me the true meaning of resilience. Clara Hayes, will you join me? Clara stepped onto the stage, the applause swelling as she approached the podium. She glanced at Veronica, who nodded encouragingly, and then faced the crowd. When I first walked into Blackstone Academy, Clara began, I didn't feel like I belonged. I thought my struggles made me invisible. But what I've learned over the past year is that our challenges don't define us, they strengthen us. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the audience. This program isn't just about scholarships. It's about believing in potential, no matter where someone comes from. It's about breaking barriers and building bridges. Clara turned to Veronica, a small smile tugging at her lips. And sometimes, it's about finding allies in the most unexpected places. Veronica smiled back, her eyes shimmering with emotion. The audience erupted into applause as the two stood side by side, a symbol of the change they had worked so hard to achieve. Years later, the Kingsley Scholarship Initiative had expanded far beyond Blackstone Academy, reaching schools across the country. Clara, now a celebrated engineer, returned to her hometown to speak at the program's 10-year anniversary. She shared stories of her work in sustainable technology, emphasizing how her journey had started with a single opportunity. Veronica, running her own nonprofit focused on educational equity, introduced her as the keynote speaker. The two women hugged on stage, their friendship stronger. In the audience sat a new generation of scholarship recipients, their eyes filled with hope and determination. Among them was a young girl clutching a notebook, her dreams burning bright. As Clara and Veronica watched the crowd, they knew their legacy would live on, not just in programs or plaques, but in the lives of every student they had empowered. The story of Clara Hayes and Veronica Kingsley was no longer just a tale of resilience and redemption. It had become a beacon of hope, proving that even the deepest divides could be bridged with compassion, courage, and the belief that change is always possible.